Hey everyone, we're back with another episode of Proselytize or Apostatize. And joining me today are Christian thinkers and apologists, Rob Lundberg and David Russell. What's up, guys?
Hey, how you doing?
I'm doing, Titus.
Cool. Yeah, and we're also pumped to have our new Jewish friend joining us, Sam Richardson. Thanks for being on the show, man.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, so Dave and Rob, anything noteworthy or interesting happened in the last 2 weeks since we last talked?
Well, the last week especially. I mean, I had to fight what I call the SOG.
The SOG?
Yeah. I'm really grateful for God because He gave me dry socks today. You know, because I have like the Walmart top of the line boots, and when they get wet, they stay wet. So I have clean socks. Put the boots back on, they get wet again.
Wait, so you have to work in the rain?
Yeah, I had to.
He's a security guard.
So I'm out at the gates pretty much all last week. I didn't get any sun, so it was kind of depressing. So when you think about it, you know, your feet are wet, they're soggy, and overcoming that, you just at the end of the week, you just thank God for dry socks.
So do you wear a rain? You wear a raincoat, I'm hoping.
Well, you know what? I'm supposed to wear a raincoat, but they cause so much problems trying to get to your gear that I started using an umbrella. FDIC issued umbrella. However, they don't like that. But
did you work in the sleet the other day?
Yes.
We were literally out of power because of that. So like power lines came down, but you didn't. You were out there in the sleet.
I was in the sleet.
More sturdy than a literal power line.
In Arlington, it actually snowed a lot. So it was like slush.
That sounds like it really sucks.
Then I had the maintenance guys flinging salt in my face, so that was pretty fun. Overall, I have a booth there, so I can go back into the booth after I allow the people in. But other than that, yeah, it's pretty tough.
Yeah.
It wasn't too tough, but
yeah.
You know,
have you been reading those books you told me you got, Jewish Objections to Jesus?
Oh, yeah. You know what's interesting about that is I realized I really didn't need the books because the whole course was online, and I just took the course, and I think I took like, what was it, 36 hours of training because when I was in seminary, you know, we didn't cover it all that much. I mean, we went through it, but like doing this, it was like a crash course. So rehashed a lot of things, but it also taught me a lot of new things.
Yeah.
Who was the author of that?
Michael Brown.
Okay. So is
Dr. Michael Brown?
Not Jewish Objections to Jesus, but refuting Jewish objections to Jesus.
I think it's.
I think the books you got were Jewish. Because I did see there was actual refuting version too.
Okay.
But
I think Michael brings up the objections.
There's one of them right there, right next to you.
Yeah, so it was funny, guys.
Answering Jewish objections.
Okay.
Right. So that makes more sense than what you're saying. Okay.
It was really funny. So about a month ago, David texted me and he said, "Can you go on Amazon and order all these books? And it should be $15." And then he said at the end, he said, "Moi." And so I was thinking through this. I was like, does he literally expect me, the host, to buy these books? And so I went on Amazon and I saw that it was way more expensive than that. So I was like, I told him I like dry humor, so he's just trying to be funny, right? So I texted him back and I was like, yep, I ordered them and I sent you an invoice plus a 15% commission. And he texts back and he's like, oh, that was meant for my wife.
I saw that.
It could have been a lot worse than moi. You know, I'm glad it wasn't more graphic than that. I don't know what all you text your wife, but I'm grateful it was just a moi that time.
And you know, I just wanted to kiss you, Titus.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I'm just playing.
Holy kiss, it's in the Bible.
Yeah. Greet each other.
So before we get into our discussion, Sam, I'm sure that David and Rob would concur with me in offering our condolences for the shooting in Pittsburgh.
Thank you.
Any type of anti-Semitism like that is just completely ridiculous. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to me at all. And I'm sure, especially being in a minority religion in the country, you would feel an attack against, a synagogue like that. Very personally, even if you didn't know anyone there. Did you know?
Well, actually, I do know quite a few people in Pittsburgh. And unfortunately, nobody that I know was in the synagogue at the time. I do know a family that are members at Tree of Life.
Oh, wow.
And I actually tutor a young man in Hebrew. And it was very tragic.
Yeah.
I was at a conference in New York that morning, and we did not know about it until about 1 PM. And it totally changed, of course, the entire tone. It was a Jewish conference. It totally changed the entire tone of our meeting. And it is because we are a people, we are a family, that even though there are many distinctions and divides between us, when something like this happens to one, it happens to all of us.
Yeah.
And which is also the rockets in Israel this week. So it's almost like 1-2 that we have it here in this country, and we're also dealing with it in our own land.
I just want to let you know, Sam, I really love Israel, and I really love the fact that the IDF does have that Iron Dome.
Yes, we do.
I'm very thankful for that.
Yeah.
I echo the same. I love the Jewish people and the nation of Israel.
Yeah.
Thank you.
By the way, you mentioned earlier a few differences within Judaism. What would you adhere to a specific stream like conservative, Orthodox, Reform? I know that even Christians often don't like to put themselves in a camp.
Right.
We're all non-denominational by now, and so is that kind of how it is for you, or would you identify with one of those?
I don't want to give any denomination a bad name by me affiliating with it. So I'm going to say that I'm traditional.
Okay.
And that I'm not Orthodox.
Okay.
But I'm very conservative in my religious outlooks. I adhere to a more conservative stream of Jewish theology and tradition than probably 75% of most people who identify as Jewish.
Okay. All right. Yeah, so the question we're going to be asking today is, did Jesus fulfill the prophecies for the Jewish Messiah? And so before we get into maybe some of the areas that we will inevitably disagree on, I wanted to establish a few things that we obviously do agree on. The first one is obviously we all agree God exists.
Yes.
And we also, I'm assuming we would agree, I know you guys agree, but I'm assuming, Sam, you would agree that objective religious truth also exists, in that whether I believe this religious truth or not, it is true, and some religious viewpoints are false. Would you say that?
Well, I think that's truth in general. There is objective truth.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
And
that would,
just because we believe something doesn't make it true.
sure.
But and we can't necessarily know all truth as limited finite beings, but it is there for us to strive after.
Yes.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, and I also wanted to jump in before we get any further that this is not a polemic. This is a friendly conversation between friends, new
Right.
friends that like Star Trek.
Exactly.
But yeah, I mean, that's one thing I wanted to stress early on, because I've seen speakers get into that mode and they speak right past each other.
Right.
And it's just not, it doesn't profit anything. So
Yeah,
I
for
just
sure.
wanted to keep that in the forefront.
Absolutely.
So Sam, would you share with us what you believe the Messiah actually is? Is it an age? Is it a person? Is it both? What is the Messiah? Just so we're defining terms here.
Right. Well, where do I begin? In traditional Judaism, there is an understanding of actually two different aspects of Messiah
Yeah.
that could be either an age, a person, or a combination of the two. But they are two distinct elements. One is Mashiach ben Yosef, Messiah son of Joseph,
Yes.
representing the difficulty of this world before the coming of Messiah, son of David, Mashiach ben David, which is more of a completion, celebration, a time when all the world, as we read in the prophets, where all the world recognizes that God is king of the entire world. So before we get to that point, there has to come a time of a returning, in mystical terms, it's called returning the sparks to Israel. That insofar as Israel is the chosen of God to be the light to the nations, not to be any better than the nations, I want to clarify that, but to be God's conduit as a light, like the flashlight, shining the light on this is the true God, as opposed to any type of idolatry that may be out there. So that those sparks of light, so to speak, are returned through Israel being Israel and obeying the commandments and being unified as a people, of performing works of, well, not works of, but statements of and personal and communal teshuvah, repentance and turning towards God, primarily as community, but of course individuals make up community, so it's a both and.
Yeah.
And the third thing, unfortunately, is also to suffer in tragic times. And there's, you can look through history that as the Jewish people have forgotten God in many ways, though never completely, then there comes a time of bad things happening, whether it's the destruction of the temple or pogroms in Russia or the Holocaust. There are bad things that happen, and we as a people have looked back on those times and said, okay, here's where we erred as a people. But then, once those times are done, then there are times of then rebuilding and becoming stronger, so that and this is all considered different phases of Mashiach ben Yosef, Messiah ben Joseph, of this suffering that will eventually lead to the coming of Mashiach ben David, the Messiah that will redeem the entire world.
Okay, and that latter Hebrew phrase refers to an actual person, right?
In many cases, yes. Not everybody believes that it's an actual person. I'm 90% there that it's an actual person. Of course, I'm as I told a Christian friend of mine this week, as we were discussing the situation in Israel, I'm not one to read the newspaper into the Bible or vice versa.
Same.
So I don't know exactly what to expect until it happens.
Okay.
Then I'll know. I can tell you.
Yeah.
But right now, I'm 90% sure.
And you would say that the Hebrew scriptures do mention what this and who this Messiah is, who he will be. There's some prophecies and things like that, right?
There are prophecies that our sages have interpreted as being messianic, but more on the age side than on the person side.
Okay.
The age side is very, very clear of when Israel is redeemed, when the nations will come to Jerusalem and celebrate Sukkot. I mean, that's very, very clear as a messianic age. But in terms of Messiah, a person, those are extrapolations that have become agreed upon by the sages and the thinkers within Judaism to say, yes, that's one of the deeper meanings of these verses, that the son of David is going to reestablish the throne in Jerusalem and be king over Israel.
Okay.
So you would hold to one of the principles that, that the Messianic prophecy is not clearly defined but gradually developed over
Exactly.
time.
Right.
Yeah, because I was about to say historical consensus, 90% were that it's a guy, right? And then we get to Rashi and it changes, but I'm not saying they didn't exist, because we know that Origen, who's an early Christian father, he talked about that view was a prevalent view, even though we don't really have any sources of that being a prevalent view at that time.
Right.
But we know Rashi really popularized it in the Middle Ages.
Right.
So am I hearing that the idea that the Messiah's an age developed more fully later, and the idea that he was a person was more originally an idea?
I would say the consensus view and the ancient consensus view that he was a person, but Rashi, who popularized it in the Middle Ages, popularized it the other way.
And you would say the opposite?
I would say that it was an opposite, going back to the time of Babylon and moving forward into the Maccabean period. Going back to that was looking for an age, a messianic age of Israel coming into fullness of the kingdom. And then it developed the personage of Messiah, which we know from the war with Rome, which Akiva actually popularized the understanding of Messiah as a person when he anointed General Bar Kokhba as Messiah in the year 120, which was a political, military, pragmatic move on his part that sparked a theological movement in Judaism and in Christianity and within Jewish Jesus believers and non-Jewish Jesus believers. That is a seminal moment in the history of Jewish-Christian relations right there, which is only a small bit of trail from where we're at.
I think though, and this comes to even me and you in a little disagreement here, is that there are several traditions You know, I don't think we have enough to say which one was more popular. That's why I refer to Origin.
Sure.
You know, because I just don't think we have enough to say, you know, what was. Because I mean, I got lists of different quotes saying that he was a person, right? And I'm sure he knows, like he's just saying, you know. But the thing is that the traditions are there, and they were button heads
Yes,
at that time.
absolutely.
And this isn't the main thing that is even necessarily relevant. We could talk about that for a while, but let's move on. And
Interesting.
yeah, I'm gonna
very interesting.
I'm gonna let you, Rob and David, put forward some of the prophecies from the Hebrew Scriptures that you would say have been fulfilled in Jesus. Obviously, the Christian viewpoint is that the Jewish Scriptures have specific passages that are very easily applied to Jesus of Nazareth. And so why don't you guys just put forward some of those passages, and then we'll allow Sam to respond.
Okay. Sam, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm really learning a lot just from your dialogue between you and David. And it's like, whoa, this is, I'm getting an education here, so thank you.
I'm trying to follow
One
along.
of well, I've been able to follow along. There's something later, I think, if we have time, I'd like to ask, but let's just deal with the passages. I think, I would hope, and I would think that maybe Micah 5:2, Jesus being born in Bethlehem, would be referring to Messiah being a person, being fulfilled. Also, that he would be from the tribe of Judah, from the book of beginnings, Genesis 49:10. We know that in his lineage in Matthew's gospel and Luke's gospel, that was fulfilled more so in Matthew's gospel. That Jesus would present himself riding on a donkey in Zechariah 9:9. And then
Can I interrupt you real quick, and we'll just allow him to respond to those three, because I don't want to give like 10 and then have him
I'm just giving these
Okay,
lists here.
sure,
And
go
then
ahead.
I've got one that I would really like to address. That he would be tortured to death according to Psalm 22. And I look at the Psalms as having different types of genres. There are some Psalms of ascent, some Psalms of messianic. Psalm 22, I think, gives a clear picture of somebody who would be abandoned, and it gives a picture of crucifixion well before crucifixion was even invented. And then the destruction of the Second Temple in Daniel chapter 9, which was fulfilled in AD 70 when Titus came in and leveled it, and that was prophesied by Jesus in his one of his last messages. And then also that his life would match a particular description of suffering, silence at the time of his arrest, his death, his burial in a rich man's tomb, and ultimately his resurrection, which I'm pretty sure we'll probably talk about at another time. But one of the ones that I really want to bring in, and this is the passage where Daniel, the prophet, talks about the Son of Man in Daniel 7. And he talks about it from the perspective where Daniel says that, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it says, I kept looking. This is Daniel 7, verse 9. I kept looking until the thrones were set up and the Ancients of Days took his seat. That seems personal. His vesture was like white snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool, and his throne was ablaze with flames. But he also talks about the Son of Man coming in the clouds. Jesus talks about this at the time of his arrest in Matthew 26, where the Pharisees had gone and said to him, "Are you Messiah?" And he says, "You say that I am." And then he says, "You shall see the Son of Man coming on the clouds." After that, they tore their clothes, accused him of blasphemy, and sentenced him to death. My question would be, are those personal? What would you say to?
What do you mean
I mean, are the ones that I listed, are those personal?
So is this back to the question of, is the Messiah personal?
Personal. But then the Daniel, I'd like to hear your response to the Daniel passage being Jesus being being considered himself the Son of Man in Matthew, and referring to Daniel's prophecy.
Lots going on there.
There's a lot going on.
Yeah. Do you want to
there,
respond to the one he spoke about at the end there, the Daniel,
Yeah.
Son of Man?
Let's just deal with that one.
Do you think that one was talking about the Messiah, the Son of Man passage?
Daniel is difficult for a number of reasons.
Okay.
I'm gonna-
This is, from the traditional Jewish perspective, Daniel, Ezekiel are of a different caliber of inspiration than Isaiah, Jeremiah. They are of a lower level of inspiration. And that goes back clear to Babylon, that they're not considered to, they're considered to be as having received these visions for a message for Israel at that time, that to themselves was not totally clear. That would be clearest in the time that, Daniel in the 70 weeks, which depending upon how you do the math, there's different things that may or may not have happened, and certainly, again, as we saw the destruction of the temple, we can say, okay, then we can see maybe he was talking about that, but maybe there's also something going on that's lost to history that happened at the time as he's in Babylon.
I know that there are some folks in the Jewish traditions that believe Daniel was a historian as opposed to a prophet.
And he was a member of the court, so he could have definitely been a court historian. Are his visions part of that? Is probably not part of the official court history. That would have been very unusual and not something that the monarch would have considered to be appropriate.
So when Jesus went and made the statement that he made with the Pharisees,
oh, he definitely.
And the Pharisees took this. I mean, these guys are
Right.
Orthodox Jews.
Well, everybody's Orthodox at the time.
They're
Pharisees, the different political parties that came down at different
you had the
sides.
Pharisees, the Sadducees, you had the teachers of the law, and all those guys, and all of them, some were supernaturalists, some weren't.
Right. Some took things more literally than others.
Yeah, well, those
And
guys took it
some
very
inherited
literally.
the Messianic fervor of the Maccabees and continued with that, and others totally left it behind, and then there were people in the middle as well. So yeah, the Pharisees were in a difficult political strait at the time because of their desire to remain to a more true form of Judaism, as they felt it, having inherited from Babylon the renewed and restructured Judaism of the exile. And so they're trying to live out this Judaism that was developed in Babylon in the land of Israel. But you also then have the Sadducees and the priests who are saying, no, we need to go back to the Judaism of David and Solomon. Because we have the temple now, we're back in the land. We need to put behind us that Babylonian home religion where every community can have their own synagogue, and we need to return to temple-centric. So the Pharisees are in a tough position. They've made their peace with the secular rulers, and they are in large part in charge because one of the things they inherited from Babylon was an understanding of how to do the sacrifices and how to maintain the temple rituals, which the Sadducees and the priests, they lost. And because they hadn't been studying it. Because when the temple was destroyed and we're all in Babylon, well, why worry about that? And of course Jeremiah says, buy a house, get comfortable, don't worry about it. So they did, whereas the Pharisees, they inherited tradition and said, no, we need to maintain this for the Messianic age. Yes, because eventually the Messiah is going to come, and there's going to be an age where the temple is going to be restored. But the Pharisees, because of their political position, couldn't really say, okay, now is it, the second temple, that wasn't necessarily it. But we're looking for that time. So yes, they did take it personally when Jesus made that comment.
What you would probably say is that yes, Jesus said the comment, but that doesn't. I mean, anyone can make that comment and claim to be the Son of Man. Is that what you're saying?
Right. That because he said it doesn't make it true.
Sure.
Did the Pharisees take it personally? Yes, they did. But there are reasons they took it personally that are historic as well as sociological.
Yeah, why
That's
don't we?
what I want to hear real quick. The sociological aspect.
Okay.
That's really interesting.
That is interesting, yeah.
Yeah, you want to chase that rabbit?
Yeah.
Well, as I said, I mean, they're in a difficult political situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as we move forward in time then, right, they're the ones who run away from the fight against Rome. They're the ones who do things like hide themselves in caskets in order to get out of Jerusalem and go to Yavne so that they can maintain some semblance of order within Jewish life, which was a really good thing. On the other hand, they also abandoned the people who wanted to stand and fight, who actually, the zealots who wanted to force God to bring in the Messianic age, which is probably not a good idea, but the nationalist, the Jewish national, the patriot within me, the American patriot within me, I definitely resonate with that, right?
You'd be a zealot.
Yeah, I grew up during the Cold War. I grew up with the threat of Russians and Chinese, and as a Jew, I grew up looking at the change in Israel from the east to the west and understanding that there are people who want to kill us. And so I am perfectly willing to go. I'm too old, unfortunately, today. But there was a time when I was on a list of Americans who were willing to get on the very next LL fight, pick up my M16 and Ben Gurion Airport, and go wherever they told me to go.
I definitely am the only pacifist on the show, aren't I? I want to jump in here real quick and just ask David, why don't you put forward a prophecy that you think was fulfilled?
First I want to know if you're a fan of Red Dawn.
Absolutely.
With Patrick Swayze.
That
Talk about the new one.
terrified me at the age of 14.
That was a good movie.
It was, yes.
Guys,
That's right.
One thing I get out of all these conversations, like I said, I went to 36 hours of just listening to lectures,
Right.
to probably listening to about 15 to 16 debates on whether Jesus was the Jewish Messiah. The one thing I constantly get is there's a headbutting of traditions. So I get that there are so many different rabbinic teachings. My whole thing is, I think what it comes down to, and I'm going to stick with one part, so I'm going to get back to the prophecy, okay? Because I'm only going to pick one, and that's Isaiah 52, 13 and 50 through 50 through 12.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Okay, so the suffering servant, obviously, right? That's the classic. Would you agree that the tradition that the Jesus followers ended up becoming Christians over, I know we got a phone so we can stop it if we want. It is fine, it is okay.
My favorite podcast have phones go off sometimes. It's kind of funny.
You can always pause and do 1, 2, 3,
Let's keep going. We might cut it out.
Keep going,
yeah. And I will just
Back to Isaiah 53.
Yeah, so Isaiah 52, 13 through 53, 12. The tale of the suffering servant, obviously, and I was asking if you think what we know as Christians now took that tradition and applied it to
Right.
Jesus, and in that backdrop, that's what they thought. And if they are right, if the New Testament is true, we have a risen man that came up 3 days later. I think that lends incredible evidence.
It would really be a bummer if that wouldn't be applied to Jesus, because all of us Christians love that passage so much. Right? That would be a real letdown.
Well, can I clarify something here?
Yeah, go ahead.
That is, I'm not here to change anybody's mind about anything.
Absolutely.
And Judaism is not a proselytizing religion.
Proselytizing. We got the wrong name for a podcast.
Which is funny to me, too, because you're supposed to be a light unto the nation.
Exactly. But that's shining the light on God.
Yeah.
And
well, that's what we're trying to do too as
right.
Christians.
So as far as I'm concerned, Christians who worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and who agree that the Ten Commandments are like the cornerstone of civilization, beyond that, everything else is just fun discussion. Because
we'll come back to that point later. Let's hit that Isaiah 53.
And that's what that's what's funny too is what Christians claim about Christ too. So and this is where we find ourselves in disagreement a little bit more, because I don't think it's the greatest thing. We're saying, oh yeah, I heard it. They say it's related to food poisoning somehow. You guys failed some food. The Jews failed the food, and they're like, oh, this is no good. But the Gentiles can have it. The Jews. That's like, and it's kind of like, well, that would, maybe, but if this is true, if the New Testament is true, I think we got a whole new different story. You know, and that's one thing I would ask is it, you know.
And that goes
What do
back
you
to our
think about-
understanding of truth.
Yeah.
Can there be truth for two different people?
All right, so here we're going here. All right, here we go. We'll come back to Isaiah
My father
53.
was very interested in the dispensational tradition in Christianity, which I'm fine with Christians holding to a dispensational view. You can hold to whatever you want to, but it also kind of makes the way for there is a covenant with Israel, and Romans 12, there is a grafting on to the vine of the branch of the nations, which does not dispense with Israel at all, but allows the nations to become part of that family of God. And therefore there are two covenants. There's a covenant with Israel that is never abridgable, and there is a covenant with the nations that was intended from the beginning moving forward. And that Christianity is the fulfillment of that covenant of bringing the nations along. And so Israel remains a light to the nations because we're perfectly fine with non-Jews turning from idolatry of all sorts and either becoming Noachites, simply worshiping God through the 7 laws that were given after Noah's ark rested, or becoming Christians, as long as it's not a supersession type of Christianity.
Yeah.
Or replacement.
The question,
Well, yeah, exactly. Well, that's what it is.
Yeah,
Supersession.
the question we're
absolutely.
asking specifically though is Jesus the Jewish Messiah? So there can be only one right answer to that, correct?
Well,
We can't say he's the Jewish Messiah for.
Well, can I jump in here
Jesus-
for a second?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm listening to this, and a passage comes to mind where Jesus says, "Do not think that I've come to destroy the law and the prophets.
Exactly, right.
I come to fulfill them."
right. Which is
So-
something I think the church has lost and started to lose back then at 120.
Because I would agree with the 10 Commandments. And
Uh-huh.
I think that Jesus, first Moses gave us 10, then we have, 613.
Right.
And then was Malachi gave us, it was 4. And then Jesus came and said, I give you 2. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind. The second one's like it, love your neighbor as yourself, which is a reflection of the Shema.
Right.
So
And those were actually already said by Hillel as
Yeah.
the essence of the Torah, and not as exclusive to, but as if you're going to prioritize something,
right.
prioritize here, and then everything else flows from it. Right, and you're right, he did say he didn't come to abolish it, which then, sociologically, points me to some things that Paul said that I think are difficult in the time, and had he realized that the parousia was not coming within his lifetime, he would have said different. It also then bears on the Council of Nicaea and removing everything that was of Israelite or Jewish nature, and then moving forward the anti-Semitism found in the church. So that even if we were to grant, for hypothetical's sake, Jesus is the Jewish Messiah, moving
Good,
forward,
we're done. All right, see you.
No.
I'm kidding.
Let's pray.
I got him to say it. It's like when I got the atheist to say Christ is risen indeed. After I said Christ is risen, I was like, I've accomplished it. As long as you actually.
That's hilarious.
I'm kidding. Go
No,
on.
you do have the whole quote though.
We're gonna cut everything else except that.
Well, don't cut the Star Trek stuff.
Okay.
You like that?
Right.
The Star Trek
Absolutely.
and
Important
Put Star
stuff.
Trek in there, yeah.
If that were to be granted, then we still have to say, but what about the next 2,000 years where it's not possible for Jews to remain Jewish and become a Jesus believer? It's simply not possible, sociologically.
Well, then what would we say if Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life"? He said it to Jews. As,
Right.
He said, "I'm the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father but by me."
Uh-huh.
That gives Jews the opportunity to become Jesus followers in Yeshua.
But the church does not allow that opportunity.
So what?
Okay, define the church.
Well, the majority of those people who claim to be followers of Christ.
Okay.
Throughout history,
That
it's
is-
not been possible. Again, going back to 120 was the breaking point, where there were Jewish Jesus believers up until 120 who were fully Jewish and believed Jesus was the Messiah.
So what is
But then it
aspects? What aspects of your Jewishness? I'm just going to use my church as an example. If you wanted to join my church, what do you think we would tell you that you could no longer do?
Oh, I think you'd probably have a problem with keeping kashrut, going back to food issues.
I would have no problem.
No.
I'm not talking personally.
Yeah.
I'm talking corporately here. Now, there are individuals who can be anywhere on the spectrum, but corporately, and I can give examples, but I think the better viewpoint is to look historically that Jews who, for whatever reason, find themselves in a Christian environment, their grandchildren are not Jewish. They are totally lost to Judaism. They have no Jewish identity. There's no continuation of family.
Sure. And I don't think we're necessarily even defending Christianity throughout the centuries.
No. I'm just saying why it's not possible sociologically, even if that former statement were to be true, it's not true in the long term by maintaining a visible, real element of Israel in the world. It hasn't been able to, I don't see how it could happen.
So you're having the same problem with the grafting of the Gentiles that Paul had. No, I'm just playing. I'm just playing. Ruined everything. No, I'm just joking.
No.
I'm just playing.
I'm a big fan of Pope John Paul II.
Yeah.
Pope John Paul II.
Of course, he was against Russians. Come on.
Well, that's right. Where he, on behalf of, not you guys, but on behalf of the Catholic Church, said Israel is the big brother. And that's how we can understand the nations being grafted on as a brotherly relationship. And brothers often argue. Sometimes they wrestle. Sometimes they embrace each other in love. But they are two different people, even though they have the same father.
Okay. Well, we kind of got way off on a rabbit trail.
We did.
Let's come back to Isaiah 53. So what would be your response to Isaiah 53?
Why didn't you give my opening?
Okay, go ahead.
So I really do see it as the fulfillment of the prophecy in the biography of Jesus of Nazareth in the four Gospels. I think it's the fulfillment. I think also, and just what I wanted to say is that the New Testament is a manifestation of the fulfillment of that subsequent mission to be the light of the nations. I think through that one man, we saw more people come to faith in the God of Israel than anyone else in history. So I see him as being the priest that atoned for our sins, and all that stuff. I think David Barron said it best. I don't know if you know who David Barron is. He's an author and a Jewish convert to Christianity. Okay. He said it well. I think he said it's beyond. Well, this is the quote. It's beyond the wildest credulity to believe that the resemblance in every feature and minutest detail between this prophetic portraiture drawn centuries before his advent and the story of his life, death, and glorious resurrection as narrated in the Gospels can be mere accident or fortuitous coincidence. And of course, I just said a lot about Paul and stuff like that, but I think he said it well, and I think that's what it comes down to for me, is that if the New Testament is true, then there's something huge there. And I know we have already talked about other things too, but for me, that was the biggest one that kind of, because the similarities in Isaiah 53rd chapter are just striking.
Yeah. So
the question is, who was Isaiah talking about when he was writing it?
Absolutely.
I think that's the first place to go. And the Jewish understanding, and I think the simple reading from Isaiah 50 through 55 is very, because you have to, one of my seminary professors said, any text without a context is a pretext. So we have to take the whole context is Israel. That is, and it's physical Israel at the time. And that Isaiah is trying to both comfort and explain what Israel is going through at the time. So the very simple reading is, the suffering servant is Am Yisrael, the people of Israel, who, going back to what I was saying at the beginning of our time, that sometimes in order to move history forward and to come closer to the time of revealing of Mashiach ben David, Messiah son of David, Israel must go through some suffering. And that it's something that purifies, it's something that cleanses, it's something that focuses, it's horrible, it's tragic, and many of our people then say, where is God? But then God then reveals himself a little bit more by doing something fabulous and miraculous.
Okay, so what would you say to that?
Well, again, I would think that the ancient consensus is actually against that, but
And you can find that.
Yeah,
I'll agree with
absolutely.
that.
Yeah. I mean, just grammatically, just in the, I mean, we could talk about Isaiah 40 to 55. I mean, it's all throughout, I think.
But there are examples in grammar from other places.
I understand. Like I said, the traditions are what butt heads here.
Yes.
They really do. And when it comes to Messianic prophecy, we see it all throughout, like I said, 40 to 55, and we can see where it talks about Israel. We can see where the grammatical is plural, even in some
Absolutely.
cases,
Right.
and we can see that it's singular in that specific spot. Where it's talking about that suffering
personal pronouns
person.
too. Yeah.
And I mean, because verse 8, let's be honest, Israel is stricken for Israel because Israel sinned. I mean, that's pretty much what it's saying. I mean, it doesn't make sense to me.
Well,
You know what I mean?
Also understand, here's another piece of social psychology, that you guys have inherited a Greek linear tradition of how to think. And as you approach the text, that's the filter, that's the lens through which you're going to be reading the text. And yes, there are Jewish sages who will come with that same understanding. And it's interesting, there have been a couple of books written on, okay, who amongst the sages has been influenced by Aristotle and Plato, and who has not? And then Maimonides even speaks about that.
Yeah.
Because Maimonides speaks against Athens and in favor of Jerusalem. He has this whole understanding of the differences between the two. So, yes, and as a Western reader of that text, it doesn't make cognitive sense. But Isaiah's not talking to Western readers, right? He's talking to Jews with an Eastern mindset who do understand Israel as a singular, as a whole, as well as disparate factions at the same time. It's a both and.
Yeah, and I could see where you're saying. I can see what you're saying. It's a both and, but usually isn't that done? There's some actual the grammatic defines that, right? Like we can see where it does talk about the plural and then it divides into the singular. And I understand what you're saying with Western's thought, but even I mean, this is obviously debated throughout the years.
Absolutely.
You know?
Right. We're
so
not
I
solid
mean,
here.
you have these Jewish philosophers and sages and rabbis and a whole rabbinic tradition saying the opposite. I mean, even Rabbi Moshe Cohen. Well, I can't. Some of these names are hard to pronounce. Even Crispin of Cordova, who lived in the 14th century, said that view that you just expressed distorts the passage from its natural meaning. So I mean, it's to me what we have here is a clash of tradition.
Are we saying that we either look at Isaiah through Jewish eyes or nothing else?
No, not at all.
What we're saying is that there's fighting amongst Jewish eyes among the passage.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think what we can agree on and what we have agreed on is that Jesus and the Christians followed that tradition versus the others of his tradition went the other route. And what I think is striking is what you said earlier when Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." I mean, if that's true, then I think maybe that tradition just got it right.
Well, I mean, there's also historical interest in what somebody living in Cordova in the 15th century could write.
Right, you're right.
Because
Absolutely.
he could write that under Muslim rule. He could not have written other things under Christian rule.
Mm-hmm.
But he's also writing under Muslim rule. So, and he's being censored. So we have to take that into account. I'm not saying he's wrong.
Absolutely.
And it's a valid tradition. But we have to take the entire context into account. Who's reading what he's writing, and will he lose something valuable if he writes something that the current political authorities have a problem with?
Absolutely.
We're gonna
You
have
take that into
to
consideration.
wrap up here.
Oh man, it's
Oh,
only been 10
man.
minutes.
Yeah.
It's been almost
We
like
had a lot of fun.
45 minutes actually. Yeah, is there anything Rob or David you want to say, and then we'll come back and let you have the last word, Sam?
That's
Well,
dangerous.
when I look at the Old Testament corpus and I see the history of the suffering of Israel, I see her rebellion, I see her wanting a king, and I see all the political, societal changes that go on up until the time of they come out of captivity out of Egypt, which I believe is historical. I believe that they were delivered around 1446.
Okay.
I hold to an early view of that, and of course the Babylonian captivity as well, and all of that, and then of course trying to figure everything out from the time that they were, trying to get their identity in Babylon, trying to keep their identity as much as the Jewish tradition that they could hold on to in the midst of a pagan culture. And then I see a silence of 400 years. And then I hear Isaiah say, "We who have been walking in darkness have seen a great light." In Isaiah 9:6, he shall be called Wonderful Counselor. He shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Then I go to the New Testament, and I see Yeshua.
Sure.
And he's the example of ultimate suffering that Israel came. I see him as the suffering servant. I see him as the one who, and I'm sure we'll probably talk about this later, he was crucified for our sins. He's our atonement, and he's resurrected. And not holding to a dispensational view, like I was when I first became a Christian.
Okay.
I'm premillennial historical.
Interesting.
I hold to a historical viewpoint. And I see the fact that Israel is now going through the difficult time with the oppression of her neighbors, and the fact that God still has his hand dipped in the history of Israel. I cannot see anything but Jesus being the one who has fulfilled Old Testament prophecy.
All right, David?
I mean, it's interesting all around. I think we hit the nail on the head about traditions and stuff like that. I think that's what's at the front of this. But as far as what I would like to close to say is that, for me it comes down to the New Testament, the truth of the New Testament. And I think we have incredible evidence that the New Testament is true. And if it is, I'm going to believe the guy that said he's going to die and then rise in 3 days. That holds a lot of weight for me if you can raise yourself up from the dead.
Go ahead, Sam.
I'm totally glad that you guys believe what you believe. And if I were to form a religion based on the Hebrew Bible, it would come out like that in many ways. I also look at some of the things that I think were inserted into the text by later church communities in order to tighten things up. The wealth of textual remnants that we have in the Gospels, more so than in the writing of the epistles, points to interesting errors and omissions that I think need to be dealt with at an academic level that haven't really filtered down to some aspects of the church, which may be a totally different
We'll probably get to
episode.
that the next episode.
Right. But still, I will still come down to that I'm fine if Messiah ben David turns out to be Jesus of Nazareth. I'm cool with that. But historically, Jews cannot become Christians and remain Jews. And I think that's the biggest issue that says, okay, there are two separate covenants, one with Israel and one with the nations, and we're both following the same God. We're older brother and little brother.
Yeah, we didn't even get to that last statement. I was going to talk about the whole one God thing, but we just don't have time. Maybe we'll hit that next time.
Hey, can I say one more thing too?
Sure.
Yeah, Sam,
Keep it
I
short.
appreciate you coming out here, man.
Yeah,
I know it's a far drive. It's not the easiest drive, but yeah, I appreciate it, especially right after your Shabbat.
I really appreciate you, Sam, and I've really enjoyed the dialogue.
Yeah, me too.
Thanks. Good to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, in the next episode, if you want to do another one, we'll probably be hitting on the question of whether Jesus claimed to be God and if his resurrection validated that claim. So stay tuned. We're hoping to have Sam back on in a couple weeks, and we'll be tackling kind of the New Testament part of this discussion. So thanks a lot, guys. This was awesome, and we'll see you all next time.